10 most haunted villages in Europe locals warn tourists about. Some villages in Europe look completely ordinary from the road. Stone cottages, a church spire, a cafe on the square. Locals who nod politely as you drive through. And then, the moment you ask them about the place, they will tell you not to stay after dark. These are not tourist traps. These are not ghost story attractions with gift shops. These are 10 real inhabited villages across Europe where the people who actually live there quietly warn visitors to be careful, where the history is documented, where the disappearances are on record, and where several of them have earned their reputation over centuries of the same things happening again and again. Stay for number 1, a village where the entire population once vanished overnight, and nobody has ever fully explained what happened to them. Number 10, Pluckley, Kent, England. Pluckley holds an entry in the Guinness Book of Records as the most haunted village in England. At least 12 documented hauntings within the village boundaries alone, not scattered across a region. 12 in a single village. The list includes a phantom highwayman at a crossroads still known locally as Fright Corner, a screaming man heard in the old brickworks, a monk seen walking near the church, and the woodland just outside the village, called Daring Wood by day, called the Screaming Woods by everyone who has heard what comes out of it at night. Local geology sits on a formation that produces unusual electromagnetic readings. Some researchers point to that as a possible explanation for why the area generates the effects it does. Nobody has confirmed it. Nobody has ruled it out. Pluckley residents simply do not walk through Daring Wood after sundown, and they do not need to be told why. Number 9, Kutna Hora, Czech Republic, pronounced Kutna Hora. 60 kilometers east of Prague sits a UNESCO World Heritage Village built directly on top of a silver mine. That silver made Kutna Hora one of the wealthiest towns in medieval Europe. The plague arrived in the 14th century. It killed so many residents so quickly that the local cemetery ran out of ground. When the Hussite Wars followed in the 15th century, thousands more died. The village had a problem it could not solve. Too many bones, not enough consecrated ground. The solution is still there. The Sedlec ossuary, a small chapel on the edge of the village containing the arranged skeletal remains of an estimated 40,000 to 70,000 people. Bones assembled into chandeliers, bones lining the walls, a coat of arms made entirely from human bone hanging above the entrance. The village around it is quiet. Residents live within walking distance of 40,000 skeletons. Visitors describe an atmosphere they cannot fully articulate, and local guides confirm that the chapel is not the only place in the village where the dead are present, just the only place where they are visible. Number 8, Belchite, Spain, pronounced Belchite. In August of 1937, the village of Belchite in the province of Zaragoza became the site of one of the most brutal battles of the Spanish Civil War. When the fighting ended, the village was completely destroyed, every building damaged or reduced to rubble. Rather than rebuild on the same ground, the Franco government constructed a new Belchite next to the old one. The old village was left exactly as the battle had ended it, ruined, empty, and forbidden to enter. Old Belchite still stands today, a ghost village of shattered stone walls, a ruined church with its bell tower half collapsed, streets that lead nowhere. Officially, the ruins are fenced off. Unofficially, locals and researchers have reported voices, footsteps, and the sound of children playing in streets where no children have lived for nearly 90 years. The new Belchite lives quietly beside it. Residents raise their families within sight of the old walls. They do not go over there, and when tourists ask why, the answer is always the same. Some things should not be disturbed. Number 7, Colmar, France. Colmar in the Alsace region looks like a fairy tale. Timber-framed houses, cobbled streets, flower boxes on every windowsill. It is one of the most photographed villages in France. What the photographs do not show is the history beneath the postcard surface. Colmar was the site of major witch trials in the 16th and 17th centuries. Dozens of women were burned or drowned within the village limits on charges that were almost always fabricated. The town square where visitors now buy ice cream was an execution site. The village also sits directly on the front line of 2 world wars. In 1944, Colmar was one of the last French towns to be liberated after weeks of brutal urban combat. Bodies buried in courtyards and gardens have been uncovered by construction crews for decades afterward. Locals describe certain streets as feeling different at night, specifically the narrow alleys near the old Dominican church, where several documented sightings of a woman in 17th century clothing have been reported by residents who had no idea the site was formerly used for witch trial executions. Number 6, Cittadella, Malta, pronounced Città della. On the small island of Gozo, just off Malta, sits a fortified village called Cittadella. It has been continuously inhabited since Neolithic times. That is not a marketing claim. that is archaeologically verified. People have lived on this exact site for over 5,000 years. The village has been sacked repeatedly across its history. The most catastrophic event came in 1551 when Ottoman corsairs under the command of Turgut Reis raided the island and captured nearly the entire population of Gozo. Around 5,000 people were taken into slavery in a single day. The village was left almost completely empty. The Cittadella today has fewer than 500 permanent residents living within its walls. Locals report an atmosphere they attribute to the compressed grief of the site. Guides who work in the village routinely describe the 1551 raid to tourists in an unusually matter-of-fact tone. Because on Gozo, it is not folklore, it is family history, and the village remembers. Number 5. Fenad Head, County Donegal, Ireland. The tiny fishing village of Fenad on the northern coast of Ireland holds a story that appears in almost no travel guides. In 1811, the Royal Navy frigate HMS Saldanha wrecked on the rocks below Fenad Head during a violent storm. 253 men drowned within sight of the village. Their bodies washed up on the beaches for weeks. Locals collected the dead and buried them in unmarked graves in the surrounding hills. The exact locations were never fully documented. Farmers have periodically uncovered human remains during ordinary fieldwork ever since. The Fenad Head Lighthouse was built directly as a result of the disaster. It still stands. Fishermen from the village have reported hearing voices calling from the water on stormy nights. They do not go out to check. They finish their nets and they go home. And when researchers ask them about it, they will tell you plainly that this is not the kind of village where you investigate a sound at sea. Number 4. Poveglia, Venice Lagoon, Italy, pronounced Poveglia. Technically an island rather than a village, but an island that once held a village. And that distinction is exactly what makes Poveglia the most disturbing entry on this list. Poveglia sits in the Venetian lagoon, fully visible from Venice itself. Boats pass it every day. Nobody stops. During outbreaks of the plague in the 14th and 18th centuries, the island was used as a quarantine station. Estimates suggest that over 100,000 people died on Poveglia during those centuries. Many of them were buried in mass pits, still traceable by the composition of the soil today. In the early 20th century, a mental asylum was built on the island. It operated until 1968. Local reports and later journalistic investigations described conditions inside the asylum as extreme. The doctor who ran it in its final years is said to have died by falling from the bell tower under circumstances that were never fully explained. The island has been officially closed to visitors for decades. The Italian government has attempted twice to lease it to private developers. Both attempts collapsed. Nobody will build on it, and Venetian fishermen still refuse to cast nets in the water immediately around it, not because of superstition, because there is nothing there worth catching anymore. Number 3. Grūdas, Lithuania, pronounced Grūtas. Not a village in the traditional sense. Grūdas is a small settlement surrounded by dense forest in southern Lithuania. What makes it unusual is the site half a kilometer from the village center, Grūdas Park. Grūdas Park houses over 86 Soviet-era statues removed from public squares across Lithuania after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Statues of Lenin, statues of Stalin, statues of secret police commanders responsible for the deportation of hundreds of thousands of Lithuanians to gulags in Siberia, all of them collected, all of them displayed. In a wooded compound near a tiny village where locals live within sight of the men who ordered their grandparents' deaths. The site opened as a museum in 2001. It is deeply controversial. Some Lithuanians consider it necessary historical documentation. Others consider it a form of desecration. Local villagers describe a heaviness in the forest around the park that they attribute directly to what those statues represent. The village itself is quiet, but the ground around it remembers exactly who those men were. Number 2. Krakow, Basilicata, Italy. Krakow sits on a hilltop in southern Italy, continuously inhabited since the 8th century. In 1963, a series of landslides began to destabilize the entire foundation of the village. By 1980, a final catastrophic slide forced the complete evacuation of every remaining resident. Nearly 2,000 people left in a single week. Krakow has stood empty ever since, a perfectly preserved medieval hilltop village where nobody lives. Nobody has lived for over 40 years. The streets are still there. The houses are still there. The church is still there. Everything except the people. Officially, the village is closed to visitors because of ongoing structural instability. Unofficially guided tours are permitted in small groups. Guides consistently describe the same experience. A silence that is not the silence of an empty place. A silence that feels like a place waiting. Krakow has been used as a filming location for over 30 international films. Crews who have worked there describe an atmosphere they find difficult to shake. And the residents of the newer Krakow Peshera, just below the hill, do not go up to the old village unless they have to, even in daylight. Number 1. Vasilyevka, Russia. Pronounced Vasilyevka. In a remote region of northwestern Russia, between Moscow and St. Petersburg, sits a small village called Vasilyevka. In 1942, during the German occupation, the entire population of the village vanished. Records are limited. What is documented is that a German patrol arrived at Vasilyevka in the autumn of 1942 and found the village completely empty. No residents, no livestock, no belongings taken, meals half prepared in kitchens, fires still smoldering in hearths, and no bodies anywhere. The Soviet government listed the village as depopulated by wartime displacement, but residents from surrounding villages have consistently maintained across generations that no evacuation was ever recorded. No refugees ever arrived elsewhere, and the population of Vasilyevka, somewhere between 200 and 300 people, was never accounted for by any post-war census or investigation. The village stood empty for decades after the war. A handful of families eventually returned in the 1970s. Today, Vasilyevka has perhaps 50 residents. They live in the same houses their grandparents lived in. They farm the same fields. And they do not speak about what happened in 1942. Not to visitors, not to journalists, and not to each other. Whatever emptied Vasilyevka in the autumn of 1942 is still officially unexplained, and the current residents seem entirely comfortable with keeping it that way. 10 villages. A Kent village so haunted it holds a Guinness record. A Czech town living beside 40,000 skeletons. A Spanish village left in ruins beside its replacement. A French fairy tale hiding in execution history. A Maltese fort still remembering a 5,000 slave raid, an Irish village that finishes its nets and does not investigate, a Venetian island nobody will build on, a Lithuanian village living beside the men who ordered its deportations, an Italian hilltop that waits, and a Russian village whose population simply stopped existing. Every one of these places is still there. You can look them up. You can visit most of them. The locals will smile politely. They will point you to a good restaurant, and if you ask them about the history, they will answer briefly. And then they will change the subject. If you have visited any of these villages, tell me in the comments. Not what you expected to feel, what you actually felt. Subscribe for more of this. The next one is even quieter.